episode 7. We're in starting out with chapter 3 and more about alcoholism in the big book. So we talked a lot last week about the spiritual malady, the spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, kind of what that was, right? We talked some about the insanity, a lot actually, about the insanity of the disease relative to the first drink, not the insanity relative to all kinds of other life-controlling issues and relationships or work or other things. Relative to alcoholism, the insanity that the second step speaks to is that idea that somehow, some way, maybe this time it might be different, or sometimes we don't think at all about the consequences that come, right, from drinking or using. So it's that lapse of thought. The book refers to it as that peculiar mental twist, right? So we talked a little bit about that. So up to this point in time, the book isn't saying that for step number 1 you do A, B, C, and D, or you write out this, or it doesn't say that. It doesn't say for step number 2 you're going to do, it doesn't say that. They're proposals, they're ideas, right? And so what the book's doing in the first 2, 3, 4 chapters is trying to give you an understanding of what these concepts and ideas are. What is alcoholism? What is an alcoholic? What is insanity? What is powerlessness? What is unmanageability, right? So those are the things that you're going to need, or the understandings of those ideas, in order to accept the proposals, which are number 1 and number 2. The first place that we're going to take any real action in the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is in the 3rd step, where it says we take this step often with a close friend. I'm paraphrasing, a close friend or whatever, sometimes clergy. Most of us honestly do it with our sponsors, but the book doesn't say, the book didn't talk about the concept of sponsorship when Bill wrote it. The concept of sponsorship was there because Bill referred to as Ebby as his sponsor, right? So the concept of sponsorship goes all the way back to the beginning, but in the first, I think, first 164 pages, I don't know that it makes mention of sponsorship, okay? So, worrying more about alcoholism. We're going to try to understand a little more about alcoholism, and so we'll get started here. More about alcoholism, chapter 3. Most of us have been unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics. There's that word, real alcoholics, again. We talked about that last week. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove that we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. This persistence, the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it in the gates of insanity or death. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. So there's a good definition for powerless, okay? So powerless over alcohol doesn't mean that I can't drink. It means that I can't drink in safety. So this statement that men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. So it doesn't mean that I can't drink. It means that I've lost the power to control my drinking. Understand? Okay. This is the first step in recovery. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. All of us felt at times that we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. We're like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. Never does there appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men. We have tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances, there's been brief recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. So this book was written in 1939. It's 2020, so what's that, 39, 40, what's that, 81 years, right? 81 years later, these words remain true. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe that they are in that class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. If anyone who is showing inability to control his drinking can do the right about face and drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to him. Heaven knows we have tried long enough to drink like other people. I always heard it said in meetings that if you want to drink, that's your business. If you want to stop drinking, that's our business, right? Here are some of the methods we have tried. Drinking only beer, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever, with or without a solemn oath, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to health farms and sanitariums, accepting voluntary commitments to asylums. We could increase the list ad infinitum. You know, one of the ones that probably is one of the most popular methods to try to control or overcome a drinking problem is to stop drinking and just smoke pot, right? The marijuana maintenance program. I'm sure that would have made this list had it been written a little later. Anybody else think of anything that you did that isn't in the book of trying to control or make your drinking or using more normal?
Doing Suboxone
Suboxone instead
instead of heroin.
of heroin? Okay, good one. Yeah, because that's not abstinence, is it? And alcoholism, AA is an abstinence-based program, isn't it? Yeah, that's what I believe in. I believe abstinence is the answer. All right, so we do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Anybody ever do that? Yeah? Did it work? No. Didn't work out? Try to drink and stop abruptly. Well, I just tried the drink part. I didn't try the stop abruptly. That seemed a little, that's a little extreme, isn't it? Stop abruptly, really? It says, try it more than once. It will not take long for you to get to decide if you're honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of the jitters if you get a full knowledge of your condition. Though there is no way of proving it, we believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking. But the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is yet time. That's a really profound piece of information, which is really true. Most of us, at least in my condition, before there was a lot of trouble, I didn't want to stop. So it was like, why do I want to prove that to somebody, But the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is yet time. We have heard of a few instances where people who have showed definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for a long period because of an overcoming desire to do so. Here is one. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but he saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. Then he fell victim to the belief, which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and his self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. Out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. In 2 months, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. Now, I don't know who that man is. I've never heard the history on who that was. So I don't know who he was referring to there. I'd be interested to know. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remained sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here's a man who at 55 years found he was just where he had left off at 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in a short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they can stop as he did on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it because none of them will really want to stop, and hardly one of them because of the peculiar mental twist. There's that statement, okay? Peculiar mental twist, that's the insanity, right? Already acquired, will find he can win out. Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, had been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 20 years. To be gravely affected, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time, nor take the quantities some of us have. This is particularly true of women. You know what else happens when you mix alcohol with other drugs? You speed up the process significantly. Yeah, so chronic alcoholism and chronic drug addiction manifest itself sometimes in a matter of months, okay? Where, it would have taken maybe 20 years sometimes with just alcohol, right? Okay, I mean, I look around the room here, all of the men here are probably 35 or less, I would say. Yeah, everybody in this room is 35 or less. So, and all of you have got significant issues that have developed in your life from drinking and using, correct? Some of you are probably late stage addiction related. Probably, I don't know if there's anybody here that's late stage alcoholic. I'd say you might be. That's probably your description. And how old are you? 29. So that's significant and that's unusual. It's unusual to reach late stage alcoholism in your early 20s, but it does happen. Most of the time, if you're drinking alone, it takes a much longer time for this thing to take a toll on us. But when you mix drugs with it, you speed up the process significantly. Okay, this is particularly true of women. I don't know if that's still true or not with women relative, if there's a difference from women to men relative to just alcoholism. I'm not sure that that's true. All right, so potential female alcoholics often turn into the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. Certain drinkers who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholics are astonished at their inability to stop. We who are familiar with the symptoms see large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, but try and get them to see it. As we look back, we feel that we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our own willpower. If anyone questions whether he has entered this dangerous area, let him try leaving liquor alone for 1 year. I would have thought, what? Are you kidding? Why would I do that? If he is a real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success. In the early days of our drinking, we occasionally remain sober for a year or more, becoming serious drinkers again later. Though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic. We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after making the resolution. That would have been me. Most of them within a few weeks. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. I'm going to read that again, okay? Because I think there's a lot of importance in this. Whether such a, okay, so I'm going to go all the way back. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. Many of us felt that we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it. This utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. Remember in the ABCs of how it works, that we were alcoholic, that cunning, baffling, and powerful, right? The baffling feature of alcoholism. This utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. So, I mean, there were times where I knew that if I drank, I knew what was going to happen. I knew bad stuff happens. Here's an example, say, one of the many times of going in and out where I got sober for a period of time and going to meetings, got a sponsor. I'd like to say working the steps, but I don't know that I was really working any steps. I was working on getting stuff back, you know. I was working on getting the judge off my back. I'm working on getting another vehicle so I can be driving around again, right? I'm working on getting a bunch of tools and loading up the back of the truck with tools so I can do work. I'm working on getting work. I'm working on a girlfriend. I'm working on an apartment. You know, I'm not working many steps, but I'm doing a lot of work. Okay? And but always inevitably that time, and I knew full well that if I drink, bad stuff's going to happen, right? I know that the truck's going to go away, the job's going to go away, probably the girlfriend, okay, and that the probation's going to violate me again, right? And so inevitably, always the time in the day came when the book makes this statement later. It says where we make the ultimate sacrifice of the desperate experiment of the first drink, right? And says that we found it impossible. There was this tremendous urge to cease forever, but says this utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish, because inevitably always the day and the time would come when I'd get the fuckets again and I'd say, fuck it, I'm going to drink. Because I was so restless, irritable, and discontented on the inside. I'm working on everything out here, but I'm not working on anything in here, and I'm not working on anything up here, right? The only thing I'm working on is how I look, my ego, and my comfort. That's all I'm working on. And if you make that the center of your efforts at recovery, you may have the same experience that I had, and that was I always relapsed again. All right, let's go on. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to the alcoholic sufferer and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. And that's kind of what I was just talking about. It was this mental state that allowed that to occur again in me, again and again and again. And for me, what it always started with was this deep dissatisfaction with life, with myself, with you, with God, and that inner gut-wrenching turmoil, hatred, angst, resentment, right? All of that stuff. It always started with those feelings, you know. And the problem was that the mental insanity, that switch, that peculiar mental twist that the book talked about a minute ago, I never treated it. And the only way that I know that it can be successfully treated is through the program of action in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And somehow, some way, and I don't claim to know how it happens, but I know that somewhere along the line, I was restored to sanity. I know today, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that one's too many and 1,000's never enough. I know that if I drink, terrible, terrible, tragic things are going to happen. And here's the other thing that's really cool about it, is having worked the steps, I'm no longer attracted to the idea of drinking. Drinking doesn't sound like a good idea. It doesn't sound attractive to me. It doesn't sound like something I desire or I want. And the good news is I don't have that stuff inside that I want to cover up or hide or push down or bury any longer after having worked these steps. So that's been my experience. Let's go on. It says, what sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time? There it is. The desperate experiment of the first drink. I love that statement. Think about it. The desperate experiment of the first drink. Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he do it? Of what is he thinking? Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. I love this story. The man has a charming wife and family, so he's got good reasons to stay sober and get sober, right? Charming wife, great family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He has a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He's an intelligent man, normal as far as we can see except for a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came in contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. What do you think that means? What do you think that means? Failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Go ahead. Speak up.
So I think it means that he wasn't happy with the people around him, with his higher power, and with
Okay, so what you're saying is that he stopped drinking and maybe did some of the right things, but that restless, irritable, discontented stuff and that feeling about how I feel about me, you, God, and life may not have changed. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
I think that's great. Anybody else? All right. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. I mean, I don't know that they're saying that he stopped going to, or he didn't engage in enough church. You know what I'm saying? Because that's often the connection that's made with the spiritual life, right? And I don't go to church. I love God, but I don't go to church. That's just not where I get it. And that's okay. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I'm not saying that that's not necessarily the path that you have to take to enlarge your spiritual life, okay? Enlarging your spiritual life, for me, is working with other men in recovery. That's how I've enlarged my spiritual life, to foster other men, to bring up and lift up other men. That's how I've enlarged my spiritual life. I've done it in other ways too. I like listening to Joel Osteen online and listen to his talks. I love his ideas, and I've read some other spiritual books. Another one I'm really fond of is Jabez, the Prayer of Jabez. That's an exceptional concept for my life that I really love and embrace. So I've done a lot of different things. The path less followed, right? Road less traveled, Scott Peck. Okay, path, sorry. I'm having trouble. My mind's not working the way it should. The Road Less Traveled, Scott Peck. That's a great book that contains spiritual ideas, right? But isn't necessarily a religious affiliation. There's another guy named, he wrote Your Erroneous Zones, Wayne. Erroneous Zones, You'll See It When You Believe It. He's another author. I'll remember his name in a minute. There's also Emmett Fox, who the founders talked about a lot, that wrote a book about the Sermon on the Mount. Thank you. Wayne Dyer was the guy I was thinking about. Okay, so there's a lot of things that I've endeavored to read, educate myself on, understand, and there's a lot of ways to enlarge your spiritual life, but they all do the same thing, and that is what you said, is they change how I feel about me, you, God, and life. They change my attitude and my outlook. They give me a different perspective. They add meaning and purpose to my life. You understand? That's enlarging your spiritual life, in my understanding. All right, let's go on. He made a beginning, okay? So, all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. To his consternation, he found himself drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed that he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family, for whom he had a deep affection. Yet, he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. What's that? Resentment. What?
Oh.
Go ahead. That's all right. Go ahead.
No, the car dealership. I heard something about the concern.
Huh?
His business.
Yeah, right. But I meant what, okay. So, yeah, resentment. He's angry. He's pissed off about it. It's like, man, I'm going to work for this guy. I used to own this place. Are you kidding me? So, what is it that triggers an idea like that, though? Ego. Yeah. So, what's that tell you? That it talked about failed to enlarge his spiritual life, right? One of the spiritual principles, one of the most significant spiritual principles that Bill Wilson talked about is humility, right? Humility at depth. Failed to enlarge his spiritual life. The humility that's necessary to foster and bring about and sustain recovery, Bill Wilson said that the steps aren't necessarily steps up to sobriety as they are steps down to humility. Okay? Let's go on. I just want you to see all of the different ideas and all of the things that come together in this process. I came to work on Tuesday, okay, irritated. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. What's that? I had a few words with the boss, nothing serious. Minimizing. Yeah. See? And that's what I do as an alcoholic. I take stuff that really bothers me, really gives me that angst, and I stuff it down here and like, it's no big deal. Yeah, he's just blowing off steam. Meanwhile, man, I'm churning. I'm churning in here. I'm churning up. I'll tell that son of a, I'll tell him why he's running this business the wrong way. And if he did it my way, the way we used to do it, right? All right, let's go on. Okay, then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way I felt hungry, so I stopped by a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I believe that's probably true. No conscious intention. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. And I think that, this is realistic. You can't not place yourself around liquor in all forms or fashions. It's just not possible in the world today. I don't go to the pub. I don't go here to the Grub Pub to get a sandwich. Okay, but for those that don't know, that's a local bar where they probably do have sandwiches. I don't know. I've never been in it, but at any rate, I'm going to go to Wendy's. But there are, when I go back to Florida and visit some of my friends and my cousin, there are bars that we have sandwiches in down there, and I don't ever have a problem with that. Today, I wouldn't have done that at day one. I wouldn't have done that maybe even in the first year of my recovery. But, if you can't walk into a bar with a family member and have a sandwich after a year and working through the steps of recovery, the book even tells you there's something matter with your spiritual condition. Okay, so let's go on. It says, suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt on a full stomach. I love it. That's great. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into my milk. I vaguely sensed that I was not being too smart, but vaguely sensed. I knew damn well. I knew damn good and well. But I felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment, remember he talked about the experiment of the first drink earlier? The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into the milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. So there is your definition of insanity. Okay? How can such a lack of proportion, the ability to think straight, be called anything else? You may find this an extreme case. To us, it's not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did on the consequences, but there is always the curious mental phenomenon, understand, that parallel with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. Next day, we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity, how could it have happened? In some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. So, do you see that? So, either way, it's insanity. It's an insane thought. Whether we went out intentionally to drink or we drank unintentionally. Either way, it's an insane idea. Do you get it? Okay. We now see that we now see that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious effective thought during the period of premeditation of the terrific what the terrific consequences might be. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. You see how much time and how many examples the book is bringing to bear to explain the idea of insanity to you? Yeah, a lot, huh? He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured several times in succession. You'd expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he is hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he's decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work and his wife gets a divorce. He is held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration too ridiculous, but it is. But is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit, if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we haven't gone to the extremes you fellas did, nor are we likely to, for we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. And I would add to that, not just stop, but stay stopped. Okay? That is the point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good, he has a fine home, is happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it's Fred. To all appearance, he is stable, well-balanced individual yet he is alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had come to recover from a bad case of the jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was alcoholic, he told himself he had come to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so. In spite of his character and standing, Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but it was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that this humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober for the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. We heard no more from Fred for a while. One day we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated that he was anxious to see us. The story he told was most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced that he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all of his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nonetheless. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity that precedes the first drink. There's another description, okay? The subtle insanity that precedes the first drink comes before. But I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned that I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident that it would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks, and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard a work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell. There was nothing new about that. What do you call that? I'd been out of town before during this particular dry spell. There was nothing new about that.
Resting on his laurels?
Yeah, complacency, I think. It's similar. Yeah, you had the right idea. Yeah, I think he was complacent. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails for dinner. That was all, nothing more. I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed, so I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more than that night, and plenty the next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know of little of where I went or what I did or said. Then came the hospital and the unbearable mental and physical suffering.
What's a highball?
Highball, it's like a mixed drink. Yeah. As soon as I regained my ability to drink, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. So what that tells you is that he still had the mind of an alcoholic. He still had that insanity, right? This time I had I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they had prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come I would drink again. They had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one way give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen, and more, for what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help me in those strange mental blank spots. Okay? It's an important statement there. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. Two of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow, but the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out of the window. That was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Pardon me. Throat's getting dry. Quite as important as the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems, I have since been brought into a new way of living, infinitely more satisfying, and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had felt only the first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As two of you men whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless apart from divine help. Had you offered yourself as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you if I had been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic, at certain times, has no effective mental defense against the first drink, except in a few rare cases. Neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. And that is what I understand to intercede on my behalf in those strange mental blank spots that the God of my understanding does for me what I can't do for myself. Questions? Comments? So do you feel like you've got a really in-depth understanding of the insanity of the disease now. Yeah. And that condition of the mind, and why that's so important to understand.
I know.
Speak up.
I know one of the things like it kept saying, like it not thinking of the consequences. It just reminded me, like, it's not the fact that I didn't think of the consequence. I knew exactly what the consequence was going to lead me. It was the thought. It was the consequence didn't matter. It wasn't bad enough for me to want to stop.
Yeah. Yep. And that's still insanity.
Yeah.
All right. Well, next week we'll talk about chapter to the agnostic. It's a hard chapter for me because I never had a problem with the idea of God, but some people do, and that's why they wrote it and put it. It's why I wrote it and put it there. So next week we'll look at that. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.